Welcome to the State of UX panel. We've got a lovely assortment of UXers here. Just going to be talking a little bit about our careers, the state of UX as it is right now, a little bit about the Denver market. So I hope you all enjoy. Really quick, I get like a show of hands of anyone who's working in UX right now? Awesome. How many are just interested in UX? There you go. Yeah. All right, well, awesome. Hope you enjoy. Just to kick things off, my name is Ashley Carter. I am a user experience designer at Deloitte Digital. I've been with the company for about 2.5 years. It's the longest I've ever had UX in my title. My experience is a little bit diverse, coming from print design, moving into web design, front-end development for a little bit, and then finally UX. So we're going to talk a little bit more about our background. So just for now, just to get things started, I'm going to pass the mic down so we can all get introduced. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Cody Moiseev. I'm a freelance product designer here in Denver, and I've been doing that for the last 11 months. And essentially, we'll get into this a little bit more, but as a product designer, I cover the spectrum of UX, brand development, design, user testing, research, all those types of things. So,
I'm John McCree. I'm a UX consultant. It's a relatively recent title. I spent 5 years at Effective UI and almost that many at Universal Mind, and a few products in between. So I guess we'll get more of that later.
Hey folks, I'm Sue-Ann Hall. I'm a senior UX product architect, I think is my current title at ProtectWise. I've been doing this for this current position. I'm pretty new at it. It's about 3 months or so. But I've really kind of delved into the space of being an in-house designer, designing products in-house. But I did work with John previously at agencies like Effective UI as well. So yeah, cool stuff to talk about. I'm excited.
Hello everybody, I am Michael Dusing. I am a freelance senior user experience designer. I primarily work on iOS and Android and native apps. Also came from an agency background. Originally I was doing a lot of print and advertising, doing a lot of retail design, did a lot of responsive web stuff, and then transitioned into UX and iOS and Android and Alexa and all that stuff too. So. To get things kind of going here a little bit, we're going to talk about kind of the difference between agencies, startups, and freelance. So I've been freelancing for about 5.5 years. I've done some contract stints as a consultant, so longer term stuff. That's generally where you go in-house. You have a team that you're working with directly. Freelance stuff is kind of interesting, and some of you guys can speak to as well, where you become HR and you're doing billing and bookkeeping and invoicing, and when somebody doesn't pay you have to hassle them, and contracts and working with lawyers and that stuff. There's a lot of extra work that goes into it beyond just being a designer and designing apps and presenting stuff to your clients. So I'll let you guys talk a little more about the difference in your background.
So I rarely do freelance things because of the HR part and the billing and getting marketing yourself and everything. I have a lot of respect for people that do. But I really enjoyed at the beginning of my career doing working in an agency, because I got so much experience for a broad range of really, really cool projects and companies, and you learn really quickly. I mean, every company that you are working with, every customer that you're working with is super different. So it was awesome just to learn that much stuff. And then recently I've been doing a lot of product stuff, working in-house as a product designer. And I've really liked that because for me, I really like the idea of being able to kind of work on a project from start to finish. So kind of what are we going to build? What's our North Star? How are we going to do this? What kind of chunks do we want to start out with? What do we want to learn from that? All the way through implementation and beyond. And so that's something that sometimes I missed out on the agency side, where you just kind of chuck something over the fence and go, here you go, customers. I can't see how it's going to go because I have to work on this next project. So anyways, I think there's kind of pros and cons to both, and I think also I know a lot of people that kind of go back and forth, like their first job could be an agency and then they do a product thing and then an agency. So I just think it's kind of personal preference, and I just really enjoy the kind of post-implementation. How do we do? How did my designs do? Should we tweak it? Or what do we do? So.
Yeah, I was one of those people that went back and forth, back and forth. I think I always tell people that the agency life, you're surrounded by a bunch of badasses. And I think that collaboration and almost, there's like a friendly competition, or maybe not so friendly. I always experience friendly competition. But it really pushes you to be better, to be the best that you can be. And you're learning a lot. You're learning really, really fast. You're also, like Suann said, exposed to a lot of different problems, and you have to solve those problems very, very quickly because agencies are expensive and you have a very compressed timeline typically. On the product side, I think that you learn a lot about, yes, the full life cycle of a product, right? Everything from inception to bug triage. And the thing that's really great about product is that you have another chance, right? So you know that you're going to get another pass at it, unlike agency where you're like, okay, we have to do everything the best that we can right now and just hope for the best. So it's a very different mentality. I think on the product side, you become very, very skilled at internal politics. And I think that some of the best senior level agency UX people that I worked with had at some point experienced that product political maneuvering and navigation inside of an organization. It becomes pretty important as far as a career trajectory. So I always encourage, when I'm talking to university students and stuff, try both, right? And now, yeah, as a freelancer, I haven't been doing this too long. I've gone rogue. And Michael's right, it's a lot. I love not having some salesperson represent me to my clients and tell them what I'm going to do for them, right? So that level of abstraction has been removed. But yeah, I don't like the billing and the invoicing. I'm doing much more project management, as well as really I was able to specialize in agency and even within product, and I think we're going to get to that a little bit later about roles that people play, perhaps. I don't know if that was on the agenda yet. Good. I'm not making false promises, but I think that as a freelancer, you have to have a lot more hats, and so I'm starting to have to flex some muscles that have become a little bit atrophied, being able to specialize in an agency and a product. So that's my perspective on the three. They're all good. They're all very different.
Yeah, I think I would agree with everything you all said. For me, like, one of my biggest things was you as much as maybe you don't enjoy that agency lifestyle or something like that, it's such a valuable experience. And I would have never gone to freelancing. I never felt like I was going to be comfortable freelancing until I put my time in and really understood like how an agency works, how the intricacies of working with the team and deliveries and different things like that. And then I also like really wanted to experience that product side, so I worked with a startup product for about a year. And I think all of those different experiences just kind of add to your repertoire of knowledge and your expertise. It just really helps kind of build and continue your career. So if you have opportunities to try different things, find what you really enjoy. You're not gonna kind of learn what fits your lifestyle, what fits kind of your interests until you have an opportunity to try most of those things. And so just be open to different opportunities that they may come up. and it's certainly going to help you in the long run. I think for me, that's freelancing right now. And I've only been freelancing full-time for about a year now, but it's been really great. And what can change is, you might get to a point where you're like, I'm really sick of this particular piece of this lifestyle. And it's okay to kind of switch and find different careers and find different paths that fit for you. It just kind of depends on where you're at in your life.
So speaking from personal experience and not just professional background, just like personal feelings on the matter, I've never really worked as a freelancer. All of my previous jobs, especially in like a UX capacity, have been with either startups or agencies. And one of the things I found, the first job that I really had like UX in my title was at a startup, but I was also kind of bounced back and forth between like UX, visual design, and front-end development. And I found that really freeing, like being in that environment, because at the time I was doing front-end development just on my own time, thinking like, yeah, I really want to make a career out of this. But it wasn't until I was put in that spot and had to do those things full-time that I realized, no, I don't want to be a front-end developer. But that was when I was really drawn to the more experience side of things. Like I'd always been involved in visual design, and I still love it to this day. But getting into like user research and testing and prototyping and things like that, having the ability to do all of those things in one environment, I found was really helpful in determining like the trajectory of my career. And now, having worked for an agency, I found the experience quite intimidating when I first started, because like John said, you're surrounded by like badass designers, and you might second guess yourself, like, why am I even here? But it's so valuable to kind of have that experience to start off with, and then just continue to expand. Being surrounded by people of different backgrounds, like their careers could be totally different from what you've experienced, and just doing all you can to like soak up that knowledge and continue to grow from there. And so just to tack on to that, like John brought up this already, and I think it's a good segue, since we're all kind of talking about differences in our backgrounds, just like the differences in titles to begin with. Because in the field of UX, there's a ton of different titles that anyone can hold, not even just like freelance or anything like that, but you could be a user experience designer, a user interface designer, product design. I'm like reading from a list right now. Like you could be a UX director, a researcher. I mentioned visual design. There's so many different titles that are in this industry, and so I thought we could talk about that a little bit. Anybody want to get started? Just so we're not like going down a long
Do you not want me to go first then, since I'm back?
It's totally
Well, I maybe you guys won't agree with me, and maybe this will spark some conversation, but I struggle with titles a lot. I understand the value of titles, and I understand kind of being able to define your role really well. For example, like I as a freelancer, basically get to create my own title. So I could have been UX design ninja.
Chancellor?
Yes.
Always wanted chancellor.
So like, you could really make it whatever you want, but like in general, I struggle with titles just because I don't really care what people's titles are. If you're working on my team, like we have the same goal, and everyone is bringing skills to that team to achieve that goal. So whether a UX designer that has to like jump in and understand some of the front end code, or if you're a front end developer like jumping into UX, titles are great, but also don't ever feel like you need to live up to a title and your skills have to fit within a title. Like expand your skills, like learn different things, and be able to be a problem solver and figure out like how you fit within a team dynamic and how you help achieve that goal. For me in particular, just talk a little bit about product design. This is kind of somewhat of a newer title that you're seeing more of than maybe you used to, and it's still kind of in flux in regards to like what it is. But a lot of what I do, the idea of product design, is very much that I problem solve, and it's not necessarily that I do UX or I do design, or I certainly don't code because I'm not great at it. But I can do a range of things when I'm working with my clients, anywhere from like helping you develop a business plan to coming up with your goals to user research and testing and prototyping and design. So like that role, that kind of title encapsulates a lot of different things, and I think that's why I enjoyed it, because I like the idea of solving problems as opposed to kind of like defining my skills.
Can I tack on that right there? So I really liked what you said about having a title and feeling like you don't have to necessarily live up to just that title. And I also just wanted to tack on really quick, don't think that just because you have a title doesn't mean you're just constrained to that title. Like just because you're a front-end developer doesn't mean you can't be involved in like some of the UX decisions that are made. Just because you're a visual designer doesn't mean you can never touch code or anything like that. And I think it all comes down to like the team that you're working with, like the group dynamic. Because I often see like UX designers will present wireframes to developers that maybe like the development was never really taken into account, the code wasn't taken into account. And I've also seen examples where developers will start changing like layouts and things like that without consulting designers. And that just creates so many problems. So I think you can kind of be fluid in the entire process of creating a product. Just make sure you maintain that really strong relationship with your other team members.
So on a scale from 1 to 5, everybody raise your hand. If you think that titles are kind of fundamentally bullshit, they're weird. Do any of you have titles that you, no? Everybody likes every title? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think that, I mean, you know, there's a larger discussion around even the idea of designer, developer. What do those mean? We all develop, we all design. Is there a really clear line? I don't know. I'm getting some scowls. Yeah, that's probably a can of worms I should try to close back up. But yeah, I think that I agree with everything you both have said. I'm not going to add to it. Let's move on.
If you are passionate about your title, we're going to have an open discussion at the end. We'd love to hear kind of why, what your reasoning is.
I said the person who actually was like, can you put architect in my title? I never heard architect. So like, I just made it up too. But I think in general, I think the way that you might translate, like let's say you're applying for a UX position, or you just see, you're wondering what this UX person is at this company. I don't know if this is true, so maybe you guys will disagree with me, but from like a translation perspective, if it's a small company or a startup, I think generally when you hear UX designer, it means you do all those things, or a huge combination of them. So you might do, I've always done like visual design and user experience design at smaller companies, and sometimes front-end development, sometimes research. So just this broad spectrum of things probably if you are seeing a UX person at a small company. A larger company or a more well-funded company or a company with a larger design team, generally you do get to specialize. So a UX person might only do UX-y things, and there might be a specialized visual design person, for example. And maybe there's even like some people that do interaction design and people that do research design. So I don't know if that, do you guys agree with that? I feel like that's kind of how you can translate.
If you're in a really big company, maybe you get levels, right? You're a level 1 designer.
Oh, yeah.
And then hopefully you can collect enough points and level up. You know?
Or you also like become so specialized. I don't know. Can you guys hear me all right without the microphone?
You've got a good voice.
Okay.
Mine
Like
doesn't.
maybe you become like in those larger agencies. A lot of times you become so specialized that you don't have like a UX designer. You have a UX researcher. You have a specialist in user testing. So the role of UX actually gets broken up into much more finite pieces. So it is a great opportunity if there's like one portion of UX design or one portion of any kind of position that you really enjoy. In some of those companies, you do get to really specialize and really focus on honing in one skill. It's always nice to just have like a T-shape though. If you like specialize in one skill, just kind of make sure you're covering a wide range of skills as well at kind of a higher level.
So I'll add to that a little bit. So Cody, it's funny to hear you describe what you do day to day, because I think Cody and I do a lot of the same things, although we have different titles. And as the internet says, Cody should be paid like 20 grand more than me just because of his title.
That's why I picked the title.
I know. You like Googled it and you're like, ooh, that one gets paid more. So it's kind of funny because I do a lot of user research as well, and then working with people on their business plans and whether there's a market for their startup and things like that. I think my title came a lot from my background because I came from an agency place where you started out as a junior and then you were a mid-level and then you became a senior. And it was like a big deal for me when I got the senior finally, kind of like the architect. So, I mean, that's part of where it came from. And then a lot of my clients are people that were working in larger companies or in agency backgrounds, less startup-y people that know the trendy names. So that's kind of interesting. I do want to evolve a little bit about from the titles. So when we're talking about like a UX designer, typically that's doing wireframes based on strategy and research. Things like that, and then visual designer is coming up with the component design and working with the UX designer as well as working with your developer. I should point out, since this is a lot of developers in the room, that I personally encourage a lot of people to learn to code, especially like just for the main point of being able to talk the same language. So in my mind, a UX designer knows the structure and even the structure of the data of a product and an app or a website or things like that, so that you can contribute to talking the same language when it comes to CSS styles and Sass, or how Swift is structured and core data, things like that. So I'll let you guys expand on that. How do you see the definition of UX roles, like when you get into UX researcher, or the new emerging title these days, I don't know if we have any writers in the room, is a UX writer. So a writer for product as opposed to just a marketing copywriter.
So what do you think? This is something that I'm interested in, and maybe this kind of gets into the broader topic of the state of UX, right? So we do have these individual titles, and you're right. I think in a large organization, that might make a lot of sense. Maybe in an agency, the different titles also make sense, and a lot of agencies work with larger organizations, so they have to assign a director. You get a director, because we need to make you feel important to justify our costs.
Because we can bill more for the director.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the state of UX, I think that so much more is becoming so much more accessible, right? From a UX standpoint, there are a lot of frameworks out there that you can do a lot more easily. There's resources and UI kits, and I feel like there's definitely a skill involved with workflows and understanding user goals, and that's all really important. And I get a lot of stuff where I see, okay, my skill is still valuable, that was a close one. But I kind of wonder a little bit about how important are those roles, and is the development community, are they seeing the same trends that I'm seeing, where freelance, so there's like murmurings, right? Is the agency dead? Is the agency model? I don't think it is, but we're seeing, at least I've noticed in the Denver market, a lot of people going independent, having a lot of success in that. No?
I just spilled water.
Oh. I thought he was like,
I was just thinking of that.
no, he's like, that's ridiculous. But that's something that I've seen. So I kind of wonder if tying that all back into roles, the freelance model doesn't really allow for the degree of specialization, or might we get to a point where networks of freelancers still allow the specialization? People just band together, in little gangs.
I mean, I would say that like the specialization comes as you get more senior and more like mid-level senior, and that when you're starting out and you're a junior in UX, you really, like you're saying, Cody, want to try things across the spectrum and see what resonates for you, so that you can definitely like build your career and decide like, oh, I really enjoy research and I want to do that instead of being just a solely UI designer.
I think one of the advantages of user experience people in the realm of like kind of make up what we do, how constricted are we, is that there's so few of us usually in organizations, and people don't necessarily, it's not really that new anymore, but people don't really know what to do with us. And so a combination of that and the fact that like, I am so grateful. It was super hard at first, but I'm so grateful when I started out. I had like zero micromanagement, like much less management. You know, people were busy. They're in agencies. Like they're fighting fires. They don't really have a chance to check in and see like what are you doing? How can I help you grow? And so you're just kind of like on your own, and you just get to make stuff up as you go. And I just think I'm really grateful for that, even though it was tough, so that you can. I don't know. I'm just curious if that's part of it. You know, because especially on. I mean, I'm a part of a startup, and it's a huge organizational, like engineering is a huge part of the team. A huge chunk of our company is engineering, and so they have a little bit more structure. And I'm wondering if like you just don't have as much, you don't feel as much freedom to just make shit up as you go and be like, okay, well, you know, this is generally the role of a front-end engineer, and this is generally the role of a UX person, and we kind of have to stay in our lanes as opposed to kind of getting together and just figuring out, well, actually, I would love to be a part of this research, or I would love to be a part of your workflow, you know, designing process. So I don't know, I'm just kind of curious about that. It seems tougher, you know, especially the more people you have on your team, the more I feel like you're kind of in swim lanes as opposed to just being able to be like, you know what, let's just break out of this. And I think that's a tragedy because, like, I'm thinking of a pie chart right now. So there's like this huge pie chart, you know, and that pie chart is user experience. And so you've got everybody that makes up the user experience of the product. You've got customer support people, you've got sales engineers and account managers, you've got, you know, people that actually are like designing the look and feel of the project, the branding and identity. You've got the front-end engineers, the back-end engineers that are like making sure that searches work well and things are coming up when you're expected to and performance is going well. And UX, like me, I am like a sliver. I'm like a sliver of this pie, you know? And I just think that's kind of funny how we're kind of representing the whole user experience, but we're not, you know? So it's kind of a sad thing that like we're supposed to own it. I don't think we should. I think everybody should be able to own it.
I agree with that, especially when you were talking about how we kind of have to stay in our own lane, because I know, so for example, at Deloitte Digital, we have like very defined kind of departments, like there's CX, which is customer experience, and they're kind of the ones going out, doing the research, gathering all that data for whatever we're gonna build. They kind of bring it back to the UX team, but like this is just someone who's like, okay, you're CX, you're on this project for let's say 3 or 4 weeks, gathering information, and then you basically dump it off to the UX team and you may never see where any of that goes. And so the UX team will then take it, create wireframes, and while we work very closely with our visual designers, oftentimes when visual design is finished, we hand it off to development, and it's kind of the same thing. You don't really see what happens to it, and I think that's kind of what, I thought it was interesting, John, when you were mentioning like if the agency is dead, and that had never really occurred to me, but I think that's kind of interesting because I think that particular model does not work. If you're just basically almost designing, not in a vacuum, but just without any other pieces of your team, whether it's the researchers or the visual designers or the developers, and you're just kind of creating things like, I think this will look good, and then you pass it off. I don't think that works at all. Like, there's no team dynamic, there's no way to really test if this is gonna work or if this is feasible if you have those separate lanes, so, yeah.
Yeah, just to add on to that, like, I've seen the full spectrum of like the state of UX and where UX fits within kind of an agency or fits within a team, and it was very much, I've worked in environments that it was very traditional, like waterfall. So you'd have your UX person who disappeared for like 3 months, and they're working on these beautiful annotated wireframes, and they're spending all this time on this document that's gonna live for like a week. And that gets approved by the client. Nobody else on the team sees it until it gets passed to design. And then design basically paints it in, passes it off to development, and they build it. That's kind of your traditional waterfall approach. And so UX was always kind of the lead, and things kind of dwindled down or were passed down there. And then as things started to shift a few years ago, as the agencies started to like switch to more agile approaches, switch to kind of this rapid iteration stuff, at least the environment I was in at the time, there was this decision that, okay, maybe UX isn't this valuable role. Maybe it's not something that like we have one person dedicated to this idea. It's a whole team effort, and we don't have a UX role. And we work very rapidly, very iteratively, so like design and development on the same track, working at the same time. And you know, at first I was like, that's fantastic. Like, I, as primarily a designer, can now fill the shoes of this UX role that I feel I have insights to provide, which previously, you know, there was a dedicated person towards. But I think now we're seeing this role of UX shift back into value, back into importance, in the sense that like, we're like, okay, no, UX is valuable. It just is not the first thing, but rather this kind of role that fills throughout the entire project. They're not just kind of done after they've created the wireframes. They're providing insights, they're doing user testing, they're doing all this evaluation from beginning to end of the project.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the agency versus product, and whether it's polish it once and hope for the best. I think that as an industry, we're all learning that your first launch or first major relaunch isn't the end, right? I've had a lot of startups that don't really understand that it's not like a house that you're building, it's more like a garden, right? And you're gonna have to tend it, you're gonna have to keep working on it. You don't want to start with a farm, right? You're gonna fail if you try to farm things out right away. Just start with a garden, keep tending it, make it more beautiful and productive over time. And I think that that's right. So UX has a role over time. I always tried to tear down those walls when I was inside a product. It is hard, right? And it's been interesting. The company cultures are so different from one company to the next, and in some companies I had a lot of success with that. Being the UX guy, working with developers and just saying, look, let's just for a moment forget titles. Let's just brainstorm and solve this problem together, and I can give some specific insight, and you guys can too. And other companies hated that, right? They're like, no, I've got a lot of shit to do, man. Don't pass your job off onto me. So yeah, I think that that kind of goes back to roles and titles and all of that stuff. I think that we're all just trying to solve a problem. We each have unique expertise.
So to bring it back around to the Denver community a little bit, I don't know if we have any boot campers in the room, but one of the things we've talked about is the expansion of the UX community, particularly in Denver. We're getting a lot of junior level UX talent, and there's a lot of discussion around people at our level that are like, are these kids gonna take my job? And just like, are they gonna hire two of them to do my job and pay them a lot less? I mean,
does that sound familiar at all? So I think that UX is kind of going through this same exact thing that development was when things were being offshored. And now, right, there's a pattern, and I think the same thing is starting to happen to UX with a lot of inexpensive talent.
Yeah, well, and I think the thing is there's a lot of juniors ready and willing to learn, but it's hard because we were talking about like having a mentor or somebody above you that gives you a little bit of guidance, where I think like freelance, the benefit there and some of the benefit in your background, Suanne, was being able to flail a little bit and be like, oh man, I have to figure out how to do this specific sort of testing, or how do I do wireframes in this new program that they want me to use. As a freelancer, I sell stuff all the time that I have no idea how to do. And then I go home, I have a panic attack, and then I Google things, look at Stack Overflow, UXers, and figure it out. And I would say a lot of my career came around by failing at things and figuring out things on my own. I've never taken a formal class on coding ever. I have learned to code by doing my own website, reading Stack Overflow comments about why people are stupid and how you should do it this way, and just a lot of trial and error. And I think that actually is the reason why I enjoy UX, because UX is problem solving at its core, and it's a lot of trial and error, specifically like working with product stuff. I like what you're saying, John, about coming back around. because no matter what, you need to distill things down to small problems and try and solve those small problems, and in turn you'll solve some of the bigger issues. Like, we need more users. That's not something that you're going to solve like by doing one item in your app or product. What do you guys think about the expanding Denver network? I know Cody has some comments about UX boot campers. Yeah?
For any of you who listen to Sprint, Michael, Kyle, and I's podcast, we actually had an episode on this, and I jokingly said, what did I say? I jokingly said,
you said find another job.
Find another job. And I think it is sparked from this idea that like there has been such a huge influx of UX designers, and that's incredible. Like, it's so exciting to see so many people interested in the industry and people that really care about like user-focused design, which I think for the most part has maybe not been as prominent as it should be in a lot of what we're seeing out there these days. A lot of things these days are flashy for the sake of flashy, or just trying to catch on to the latest trends and throw some drop shadows and gradients on things. But having like a UX core and having kind of a reason for the decisions that you're making makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, like us who have been in the industry for a while, we're suddenly like, oh shit, like we didn't have a UX boot camp, or we didn't have something that really taught us UX as much as like, we just learned it. Yeah, we just kind of learned it, and it's. I think it was the same as episode I said that we had street UX skills. So we learn UX in the streets. But that's the interesting thing is now there's these students and these kind of other people coming in the industry that have this incredible intense focus on a particular skill, and I think that's really great. But I think the challenge is, how do you as a junior kind of stand out, and how do you make sure that you have a unique perspective that other people aren't having out there, to help yourself get a job, to help yourself kind of expand your career. And then on the alternative side, like, I'm sure it's difficult as developers and as other people who might be kind of in management positions, is how do you pick somebody to hire out of this huge field of available talent out there? So I'll kind of lead it to the rest for answers to that. But
Well, I just see there's a friggin' gold rush happening, right? I talk to a lot of people coming out of some of these boot camps and General Assembly, and I'm supposed to do portfolio reviews or whatever, and it's, why UX? Why are you doing this? And they don't really know how to answer that, right? Or at least some of them don't. I'd say that there's definitely half, or maybe even a little bit more, that don't really answer that well. It's that, well, it just seems like a good career. I didn't really like what I was doing. This seems cool. I like using apps. It's kind of all over the place. And it's tough, right? So I feel like, I saw the web designer take off in the early aughts, right? 2000, 2001, where you walk downtown and there'd be like 20-year-olds walking around with briefcases with giant smiles on their faces because they were like rolling in money, right? Before the bubble burst. And I think that that's kind of happening now in UX. People don't really know why they're doing it. They don't have a lot of passion. And then they have like outrageous expectations about the kind of money that they're gonna make, because that's why they're getting into it in the first place. They're like, oh, you can make a shit ton of money being a great UX designer. No, you can't. You can't unless you've been doing it for a while, unless you know what you're doing. I started because I just thought it was the coolest shit in the world, right? I like stayed up nights teaching myself how to use Director and how to animate in Flash and how to write ActionScript, just because I thought it was friggin' cool, and I had zero practical application for it whatsoever. And when I started, I made $15 an hour, right? $15 an hour, and I did that for a while. And then I worked my way up. And I think that there's so many people coming into this that are like, oh, I think I'm gonna start at about 80K. Like, no, you're freaking not. You've got to put in the time. I don't know if that, yeah.
Tie real quick into that. I want to tie real quick into that, which is an interesting thing. Is like I think the biggest thing that, regardless of if you're junior, if you're senior, or anything, what's going to really let you shine is how you communicate, and like being able to understand, identify, and communicate your passion is going to take you so far. Like all the skills, all those kind of things that you learn, the textbook learning, if you will, is incredible, but those are tools in your tool belt to make your job work. And you are a problem solver, you're a thought leader, you're a communicator. And being able to communicate, being able to think critically, those are things that are much harder to teach. And if you want to get far in this industry and if you want to succeed, those are the things that I think I look for, and I think a lot of people look for, is somebody that is passionate and able to communicate that passion.
So yeah, just tacking on to that, I feel like the biggest thing that I took away from what you said was about your tool belt. Like, there are dozens of UX and prototyping related tools out there. Like, there's Axure, Balsamiq, Principle, Sketch, Illustrator, Adobe XD Design. Like, I could go on for a long time because there's tons of them. And there's new ones coming out all the time and they look really flashy and you're like, yeah, if I can just master this, like that'll be enough for my portfolio to demonstrate that I'm a UX designer. And that's not true at all. Like, you could have the prettiest shit ever. And don't get me wrong, that'll really help if you're trying to also work like the visual design angle. But like John was saying, without being able to properly communicate the passion that you have for this industry, and like, don't get me wrong, like we are kind of experiencing a saturation in the industry right now, which is natural because UX is such an exciting field and there's so many people interested and so many people trying to get into it. So even the best advice doesn't guarantee that you're gonna get a job. But like, from my personal experience, like, I think my career has been built upon like being overly ambitious and dumb fucking luck. So just kind of like what Michael was saying, like, I would stay up or what John was saying, like staying up all night, like trying to learn front-end development, trying to learn UX and the psychology behind it, trying to learn visual design, and just making things that had no practical application, but being able to like annotate those things and like put that, like not just visuals in a portfolio, but also like kind of like case studies, like explaining why I did what I did. Like having that, I think really maybe not set me apart, but the person that eventually hired me like did comment that you could tell the passion that I had for this industry because I put so much work into it. So that's really the end goal. Like I said, there's a saturation, it's no guarantee, like no advice is gonna land you a job, but you really have to be passionate about it and you have to be able to show it and explain it.
So I think we're going to take some questions from the audience, but I want to give Sue Ann a moment to respond if you have anything to add.
We'll still have 15 minutes, so.
Yeah.
Cool. No, I think that's awesome. I just wanted to kind of really validate everything that everybody's been saying. Like you were mentioning the tools as well, and I think that I could give a crap about the tools I use these days. 6 months later down the road, I'm probably going to be using some other online prototyping tool. You know, it just doesn't matter. And like, what matters is like what's in your head, and the fact that you can like communicate what's in your head outward. You know, it doesn't even. I'm the world's worst illustrator for being a designer. I'm awful. I've never been able to like, even on a whiteboard. I hate drawing a whiteboard. I'm so bad at it. But it's just kind of, you know, luckily like that's okay. It's just the ideas that get out there. So I think that's interesting. From the new people coming in, I'm kind of a hypocrite about it because I love that there's fresh blood. You know, I really love that. I love that there's all these people I've been working with for 20 years and they all kind of have the same types of approaches and the same way of thinking. And I'm working with somebody on my 4th job in a row with her. You know, I love working with her, and you just can't buy that kind of loyalty when you come into a new position to be like, oh my gosh, I'm working with my favorite person ever, and we just click. You know, we just know exactly how we're going to work together. So that's kind of why I'm a hypocrite, because like I'm not actually starting an internship program and I'm not really doing my due diligence of being the good mentor that I should be, even though I had great mentors when I first started out as well. So I think that's one thing to kind of add to that. And then lastly is I think one of the really interesting things is not to, from my perspective, I always find it bizarre that people would feel a little bit threatened about taking over our positions, or at least the stuff that I've been doing a lot lately. I think a lot of it has to do with, I don't know if I call it the soft skills, but just the strategery, it's the strategy stuff that like really still gets me so excited. I still love this so much. It's like recently, I think one of the best projects I've ever done was to validate how we were going to lose millions of dollars if we did a project this way, So it's like my favorite project was one I've never done, because it was awesome. So that was one great example. Another great example is just like getting kind of evil and thinking about how can I like hard code, how can I work with a revenue person and like hard code a revenue strategy into my user experience and make it rock solid so that people can't pick it apart and try to take away my user experience, because there might be some sort of like short-term revenue initiative and they don't want to leave a little bit of money on the table. I'm like, I'm sorry, but like this is rock solid. You can't move this, That's awesome. Like I don't think a junior designer kind of gets that kind of high by that type of stuff. So I don't know. I think there's a difference. I think it's from the tools and somebody saying, hey, design this experience. That's something we all have to do, but I think we do a lot more on top of that that probably gets us a little bit more excited.
So yeah, we've got our...
Yeah, we have some time to take some questions from the audience. So if anybody has a question, you can either stand up and shout, or I'm happy to pass the microphone to you if you have a question that you want to ask us, and we will respond in kind. Anybody? Morgan. Yeah, sure.
Am I projecting? Is that okay?
Sure. I'll repeat the question.
Okay. So hand in hand with the boot camps and the gold rush, have you noticed that companies have actually shifted perception and expectation of new job applicants who actually expect that somebody has been through a boot camp versus actually having a compelling individual story of, I built my first website in GeoCities in '98, and then I did this, and then I did this. And now I'm interested, but it's all self-taught.
So the question is about whether companies focus and expectations based on whether somebody came from a boot camp or whether somebody is self-trained have shifted at all. I kind of feel like I have a harsh answer. But my harsh answer is the companies don't give a shit. Like, if you have the skills, you have the skills. If you can do what they need to do, then they'll be happy to hire you. There are certain scenarios where they're specifically looking for a junior or a lower mid-level person because they have somebody who's well established in their company and they're like, we just need support in this role. So that's where like having a broad aspect of like, I've done UI, I taught myself these different programs, I've done wireframes before, I helped out with research, things like that, where it might be easier to get your foot in the door. But I think all in all, companies just need somebody to do the work and do it now. And generally they're hiring because they have spent 4 months without somebody doing that. I don't know, I'll let you guys answer.
I disagree.
Oh yeah.
To an extent, like of course there are going to be some companies who just need shit done right now, and they're just looking at like, you have 5 years of experience, here's your portfolio, great, you're in, just get started. It depends. Like certain startups might have that kind of mentality because they have this idea, they may be limited on funds, like they need to get shit done and they need to get it done now. So of course there could be that, but I think other agencies in particular, maybe if they kind of have, like you can tell the agencies that have that kind of like, we're so fun angle, I think they do care a little bit about that background because at the end of the day, like yeah, it's the company who's saying I need a mid-level UX designer, but if we're talking about like company culture, the people that are interviewing you, they're gonna see if you kind of fit, or not even fit that company culture, which can bring up its own mess of problems. But I think they are interested in that background. I think if they see something like, yeah, I built my first site in GeoCities, or I started playing with CSS when I was 12 on MySpace or something like that, and they can just see this like built up interest that you've had, or even if it's coming out of nowhere. If you're like, I was an accountant and I started fooling around in Sketch and it turns out I was really good at it, so I decided to just you know, spend all of my free time doing that, and they can see that passion, which is something that I kind of talked about a little bit earlier. I think that makes a really big difference in how you're perceived by companies.
Yeah, it's passion and interest. I think that the check the box, I'm certified by so-and-so, there's nothing out there yet that really holds, its credentials are really that great. I think that those programs provide a lot of exposure for people taking those programs because they invite agencies in and they invite businesses in. And so those people are seen, and then it all comes down, I think that a person in that company versus somebody who just has been doing stuff on their own and creating their own projects, it's totally, I think, exactly what you're saying. It's who is this person, what are they all about, where does their passion lie? Okay, these guys have, you know, do they have the skills or not? Typically skills, you don't get in the door unless you've got the skill, right? It's the same with a portfolio or anything like that. That's kind of table stakes, at least my experience at an agency, right? You're in the door, and then it all comes down to your passion, your drive, your motivation, your people skills, your communication skills. It's everything it's all of those soft skills that I think are valued so much more than I can organize a pretty, you know, I've got a rudimentary understanding of information architecture, and I can copy a website just, you know, as well as the next person. It's, yeah. Rain?
Cody?
Everyone covered it well.
Anybody else with
Any
questions?
other questions?
From
Yes,
back?
in the back.
Yes, I'm just like wondering in here, like, when you're solving problems, when you're solving UX problems, like, have the patterns been set? Like, if you hit certain problems now, you know how to solve those in a UX way? Or in your day-to-day jobs, do you still have to throw the look out and try totally something different, see if it works, see if it fails?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for anyone who didn't hear it, essentially it's, I'm not going to be able to phrase it very well, but do you get to a position where like you just kind of solve, like you have the way to solve a problem, or do you solve it in a different way, or do you have to kind of use new tools to solve problems? Did I capture that essentially? So if I did somewhat capture that, I think it's a little bit of both, at least for me. Like there's a lot of things that, and I'm sure this is true with anybody's career out there, is there's certain things that are just kind of set, and that you don't have to kind of put a lot of cognitive effort into to kind of say like, okay, these are best practices when establishing like wireframes, or these are best practices in regards to don't use a carousel on your homepage at the top, please. Stuff like that. But then there are other times where, you know, there are completely new things that you have to solve for, and for me at least, it's about, I have a whole tool belt full of skills, and it's kind of like looking around and figuring out like the best way. So maybe, you know, you're trying to solve something and user interviews is the best solution, so you might do something like that. Or maybe this is something, oh, we should prototype this and just click around and see if from our perspective it really works. So I think there's certainly times where things are just kind of going at their own pace, and they are what they are, but a lot of times, like, I don't ever have like a process or a system that I have to go through for a project, as much as like, what's the best way to solve this problem, or what's the best way to kind of find the solution we're looking for.
Yeah, I think there's like a sweet spot of where are you going to innovate, right? Every project has a focus of, okay, what's going to be unique about this? And I think that has to be a deliberate decision, because I think that if you have a lot of time on your hands, sure, you might figure out a much cooler way to log in, right? But there's, I think that innovation should be fundamentally deliberate. We're going to change this. We're not going to accept a standard pattern because we want to make this different and why, rather than just coming up with things. So yeah, I feel like there's a lot of stuff that's relatively boilerplate. I think the patterns are constantly evolving, and I actually think that that's because somebody has decided to take the time to figure out, is there a better way to do this? And every once in a while, I think that we all will do that, right? You'll just like, I'm fucking sick of doing this kind of navigation. I'm tired of it. Is there a better way, right? And when you get to that point, maybe you come up with something better. Maybe you just, spend a couple of days and go, oh, that was a freaking horrible idea. And it's probably more the latter, right? I mean,
Well, you
that's
test
how I
it
feel.
and find out,
Yeah.
was this a horrible idea or not?
Absolutely.
Or a lot of it, I think, also comes from like, okay, I've done navigations this way 100 times because it makes sense, it's the best way.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden you're like, oh wait, I'm working with disabled users or something like that, and suddenly you have a new user set that you have new considerations to make for. So a lot of times the best practice works really well until your users change, or there's some factor that shifts.
So every time I start a new project, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Like every single time, I am a deer in the headlights. And half of me thinks that by now I should have grown up and I should have figured out like how to solve every time I start a project, what's my first steps, But half of me, I think, as John was saying, is like, I think you kind of owe it to yourself to like take a step back and be like, okay, is this like, I know that this is the project that somebody has given me, but is this really the problems that I'm trying to solve? Maybe I could go about things a different way and look at, well, what's your strategy? What's your goal here? What's your target audience? So I think half the time it's just me trying to like really make sure that before I get started on, like left-hand navigation patterns or something, I'm actually like doing the right thing despite what somebody says is the right thing to do. So I think that's why I'm stuck every single time. I hate starting a new project. I absolutely hate it because it takes me like a week and I'm like, they're gonna fire me, I haven't been doing anything. And then finally I start to like maybe do some stakeholder interviews and that kind of sparks something, and then I start to do some sketches and then I'm just like heads down and then I'm getting so excited. But I don't know, every time I don't know what I'm doing. I have no pattern.
There's also like the nature of the product that you're building, right? So it's I had a client in the insurance industry that at the end of applying for insurance for your house was like, well, this should be more interesting, right? It's like, no, people just want to do this and move on with their lives. They're excited about the house that they're buying. They're not excited about the insurance that they're obligated to have with the home, right, in order to get a mortgage. So I think that it's respect to the product to decide what needs very standard, relatively acceptable patterns for that user base versus maybe there's something to do here. So many people wanted interactive websites there for a while, right? Remember that was like a huge thing?
Parallax on it.
Yeah, and it was like, well, what product do you have, right? And it's like, well, we just have like a few things that people should read. It's like, well, what are they interacting with? They're consuming. There's a huge difference between consumption versus interaction or creation. And I think it's just respect to the nature of the product that you're building.
So one of the things I want to add to that is like, yes, there's a convention with like login screens and things like that and login flows. At one point, the convention was to offer every social network that exists that you could log in with, and there's 10 different choices. And now things have dwindled down some. And I think that has come from people trying to figure out a better way or a smoother way, or figuring out the research of how many do these people actually use. And if we present 4 different ways to log in, do people use all them, or does it just make more people get pissed off? Because nobody wants to create like new accounts and sign in and stuff. It's a pain in the butt. The other thing that I want to add to that is like with left-hand nav and like there's tab bar navigation and there's hamburger navigation, and those are conventions that a lot of people use. I will throw out there one of my favorite examples is Snapchat is just like screw navigation the way that it exists. Let's figure out a totally different way to do it. And that really worked for them and really worked for their target audience. A lot of it is like trying new things and saying like, if we just make everything swipeable, is that gonna work? Let's try it and show it to some people, and can they figure it out? I mean, we as old people talk about Snapchat like it's the app that you open and you have no freaking idea how to use it. But there are conventions that people have really broken out from and been successful for. So is this a problem that you need to solve for your product that is going to become a core thing? And you may not even know that to begin with, but presenting your core experience and solving your core problem may lead you to, like, navigation is something that we're going to do really differently. I think we have enough time for one more question. Go ahead.
Hey, so speaking of breaking convention, what is your thoughts on just skipping wireframing altogether? So I'm you guys are second.
How much time do we have?
I find it much easier to just go straight into coding something rather than wasting time with wireframing.
So the question is about our opinions on skipping wireframing altogether and just jumping into like prototyping and coding. So I will say our podcast Sprint is named after Design Sprint, being like a 5-day process and really taking a short period of time to come up with lots of solutions to a problem and then prototyping them and testing them in a very short avenue. The goal there is to do that and like not necessarily skip wireframes, but get to a level of a prototype, whatever you need to get the point across and find out whether your solution is working. It could be wireframes, it could be full designs, it could be sitting down with the developer and coding something real quick, just enough to get the point across. Is it one flow, whatever. So in my opinion, I would say that you can skip wireframing a lot of the time. It's really just about getting to presenting a solution to a user as quick as possible and validating that. For me, the point of UX is the why. Why did you do something and did it actually solve the problem for the user? And that's why I like working as a freelancer and a product person in smaller teams, is because you know if your design or your development actually paid off in the end much quicker. Where in larger agencies and stuff, you don't even know your design went to a department and maybe it made it out there. You don't even know whether it was released.
I know I'm kind of preaching, but again, I think wireframes is one of those things that like, does it work for you? Is it something you need? Like wireframes used to be this thing that it was a deliverable. Like it was something you had to do and the client was expecting it and they're not going to use it, but you have to deliver this beautiful annotated document. And a lot of, product design practices, or especially agile practices, is like, don't spend time on documentation, spend time on building things. And so if your wireframe needs to be a fully annotated document because that's what works best with your team and works best with the project, cool. But most of the time, that's not totally valuable. Most of the time, a sketch on a napkin is enough for the developer to actually have an understanding and be able to get started. So it's a lot like
feedback on.
Yeah, so I don't wireframe that often, but when there's times that I need I think we all still wireframe. Our wireframe is just on a whiteboard or in our notebook or different things like that. So as a document, as a deliverable that you have to create and spend a lot of time on, I don't think that's necessary. And I think yeah.
Can I tag on that really
Yeah.
quick? So I think based on the work that I do on a daily basis, the term wireframe has kind of evolved from, instead of it being this super annotated, flat document, thanks to programs like InVision or Axure, things like that, our wireframes have just really become clickable prototypes so that visual designers and developers can kind of see how it actually works, because even annotations will be like, okay, you click on this button and things will animate to the left. Like that's not really telling the actual story. So these prototyping tools really help in just conveying that. So that's where I think like wireframes are still valuable, but my idea of a wireframe is really a prototype.
So we want to thank everybody for coming to the panel. Thanks a lot. You can find all of us on the Denver Dev Slack or the Denver UX Slack. If you're interested in UX, we'd encourage you to join that. It's denveruxers.com. And also, if you guys are interested in UX, Cody and I are on a podcast with Kyle, a developer, about UX weekly. It's called Sprint. We'll be doing a live show later today at 1:30 in Chalk. If you're interested. Yeah, we're basically
Way less.
mean to each other and record it, so it's much more debate. But thank you very much for coming.